Emma Sullivan hurried through the sliding glass doors of Westfield Market, the largest supermarket in Oak Ridge, Massachusetts. Her chestnut hair was tied in a messy bun, sheet music threatening to spill from her tote bag as she fumbled with her shopping list. It was Saturday morning and the store buzzed with weekend shoppers. "Focus, Emma," she whispered to herself. Tonight's dinner had to be perfect. After months of fundraising, she'd finally convinced several potential donors to visit her community music center. Their support could change everything for her students, kids who had discovered refuge in music despite their challenging circumstances. The imported spices were proving impossible to find. Emma had searched 3 aisles already, her frustration mounting with each passing minute. She spotted a man in a crisp button-down shirt, examining a display of organic produce. His posture exuded confidence despite his simple attire. "Excuse me," Emma called out, approaching him. "Could you tell me where to find the imported spices? I've been looking everywhere." The man turned, his steel blue eyes meeting hers with surprise. Matthew Bennett wasn't accustomed to being addressed so directly, at least not without the deference that typically accompanied interactions with the owner of Bennett Retail Group, a billion-dollar chain of supermarkets spreading across the Northeast. For a moment he considered correcting her misconception, but something in her direct gaze, free from the artificial reverence he'd grown weary of, made him hesitate. "They're actually in a special section near the International Foods," he replied, gesturing toward the back of the store. "I can show you if you'd like." "Would you? That would be incredibly helpful. I'm in such a rush today." Her smile was genuine, her gratitude unpolished. As they walked together, Emma's sheet music finally slipped from her overstuffed bag. "Oh no." She knelt to gather the scattered papers. Matthew immediately bent to help. "You're a musician?" he asked, noticing the complexity of the compositions. "Music teacher, actually. I run the Oak Ridge Community Music Program." Pride filled her voice. "These are for my students. We have a recital next month." Matthew handed her a Mozart piece, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Beautiful choice. Mozart's Piano Sonata, No. 16. Emma looked at him with newfound interest. "You know classical music?" "A bit," he said modestly, concealing that he'd been a piano prodigy before his father had insisted he focus on the family business. "My mother was a piano teacher." They reached the international aisle and Matthew guided her to the specialty spices. As Emma selected saffron and cardamom for her paella, she explained her evening plans. "These donors could change everything for our program. We're operating on such a tight budget, but these kids, they're so talented, so deserving of opportunity." Her passion was palpable, her eyes alight with purpose. "Sorry, I'm rambling to a complete stranger." "I don't mind," Matthew said truthfully. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without an agenda? "I'm Matthew, by the way." "Emma Sullivan. Thanks for your help, Matthew. You're much nicer than most employees I've encountered here." He chose not to correct her. For once someone was seeing him, not his wealth, not his status, just him. At the checkout line, a sudden downpour began, rain drumming against the large windows. "Do you have a car?" Matthew asked, noticing Emma's frown as she stared at the deluge. "No, I usually take the bus," she sighed. "So much for keeping these ingredients dry." "I can give you a ride," he offered, surprising himself. "I'm finished with my shift." Emma hesitated momentarily before accepting. "If it's not too much trouble, I need to go to the community center on Maple Street." Matthew led her to his car. Not the Tesla he usually drove, but an understated Volvo he kept for incognito visits to his stores. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, classical music played softly from the speakers. Chopin's Nocturne. In E-flat major, Emma identified the piece. "One of my favorites." "Mine too," Matthew admitted. Their conversation flowed effortlessly as they discussed composers and performances. For the first time in years, he felt the tension leaving his shoulders. The Oak Ridge Community Center appeared through the rain, a modest brick building with a faded sign. Emma invited him inside to wait until the downpour subsided. What Matthew saw inside transformed his understanding of Emma's work. A converted gymnasium housed several upright pianos, some violins and other instruments, many visibly second-hand. On the walls hung children's artwork alongside musical notation posters. Despite its modest appearance, the space radiated warmth and purpose. "We make do with what we have," Emma explained, noticing his survey of the room. "The instruments are mostly donated, some repaired so many times they're more patched than original." She ran her hand lovingly across a worn piano. "But they make beautiful music." "How many students do you teach?" Matthew asked. "About 40 regularly, ages 6 to 18. Emma began unloading her groceries in the small kitchen area. "Most come from families that could never afford private lessons." Matthew thought of his company's community outreach program, largely performative events orchestrated by his PR team, and felt a twinge of shame. "Do you need volunteers?" he asked suddenly. "I mean, I'm not a professional musician, but I could help somehow, maybe after work." Emma's surprise gave way to delight. "We always need volunteers. Can you come Monday afternoon? We have group lessons at 4. "Alto." "Be here," Matthew promised, already mentally rescheduling a board meeting. As the rain slowed to a drizzle, Matthew prepared to leave. At the door, Emma handed him a flyer for the upcoming student recital. "In case you'd like to see what we're working toward," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. Driving away, Matthew glanced at the flyer on his passenger seat. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't immediately name. A lightness, a purpose outside the relentless growth of his business empire. His phone rang, his assistant's name flashing on the screen, with undoubtedly urgent matters requiring the CEO's attention. But Matthew's thoughts remained with the passionate music teacher and her students. He had promised to return as a volunteer, and somehow that commitment felt more important than any business deal awaiting him at corporate headquarters. 3 weeks had passed since Matthew Bennett first stepped into the Oak Ridge Community Music Center. What had begun as a spontaneous offer to volunteer had evolved into a regular commitment. Every Monday and Thursday afternoon, the billionaire CEO traded his executive suite for a humble classroom, helping Emma Sullivan organize sheet music and occasionally assisting younger students with basic piano techniques. Today, Matthew sat beside 8-year-old Zach, guiding the boy's small fingers over the keys. "That's it," he encouraged, as Zach successfully completed a simple scale. "You're getting better every time." Across the room, Emma observed them with a smile. When Matthew had first appeared for his volunteer shift, she'd been skeptical. Most volunteers didn't last beyond a week once they realized the work involved more patience than glory. Yet here he was, still showing up with unwavering commitment. "Mr. Matt, will you play something for us?" Lily, a shy 10-year-old violinist, asked during the break. The other children quickly joined in the chorus of requests. Emma raised an eyebrow. "You never mentioned you could actually play, Matthew." Matthew hesitated. It had been years since he'd performed for anyone. After his father's death, he'd packed away his passion along with his grief, focusing entirely on the business empire he'd inherited. "It's been a long time," he admitted, but the children's expectant faces broke down his resistance. He settled at the upright piano, its ivory keys worn from years of use. As his fingers touched the keys, muscle memory took over. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room, silencing even the most restless children. Matthew closed his eyes, letting the music carry him back to simpler times, before board meetings and quarterly projections had consumed his life. When the final notes faded, he opened his eyes to find the room completely still. Emma stood transfixed, her expression a mixture of surprise and something deeper. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "You play like someone who spent a lifetime with music." "I almost did," he replied softly. "In another life." The moment was interrupted by enthusiastic applause from the children. As they returned to their lessons, Emma approached Matthew. "You're full of surprises, supermarket guy," she said, using the nickname she'd given him. "Most supermarket employees don't play Debussy like concert pianists." A flash of guilt crossed Matthew's face. The lie of omission was growing more uncomfortable each day. Several times he'd considered telling Emma the truth, But the thought of her looking at him differently, with the same careful deference others showed, stopped him. "I had good teachers," he deflected. "Speaking of which, you're remarkable with these kids." Emma accepted the compliment with a graceful nod. "It's easier when you love what you do, though loving doesn't pay the bills." Her expression clouded. "Our funding situation is getting critical. I've applied for every grant I can find, but there's just not enough support for arts education these days." Matthew felt a familiar tightness in his chest. With a single phone call, he could solve Emma's financial worries. Bennett Retail Group's charitable foundation distributed millions annually. Yet making that call would mean revealing his identity. "What about private donors?" he suggested carefully. "Surely there are wealthy people in Oakridge who could help." Emma laughed without humor. "Oh, I've tried. I've sent proposals to every company in the county, including that retail giant Bennett's." She gestured dismissively. "Their headquarters is just across town, but you'd think it was on another planet. I can't even get past the reception desk." Matthew winced internally. He had no recollection of Emma's proposal, which meant it had likely been filtered out by his staff's efficiency protocols. "Maybe they just need to see the program in action," he offered, "to understand what they'd be supporting." "Maybe," Emma conceded, though her tone suggested doubt. "Anyway, we're hosting a small fundraiser next week, a performance followed by refreshments. Nothing fancy, but the kids have been practicing for months." She hesitated before adding, "Would you like to come? You could even play something if you wanted." The invitation caught Matthew off guard. His calendar for next week included a charity gala in New York and meetings with international investors. His assistant would have a fit if he suggested rescheduling. "I'd love to," he said, surprising himself with his sincerity. Later that evening, Emma walked Matthew to his car, their conversation flowing effortlessly as it always did. In the 3 weeks they'd known each other, they'd discovered countless shared interests, not just music but literature, hiking, and a mutual addiction to solving crossword puzzles. "You know, I've told you all about my life," Emma said as they reached his Volvo. "My college years at Berkeley, my failed attempt at a performance career, even my disastrous relationship with that jazz saxophonist." She leaned against the car door. "But you rarely talk about yourself, Matthew. What's your story? What brought you to Oakridge? Family? Relationship?" Matthew froze. This was the moment to come clean, to tell her that he wasn't just a supermarket employee but the CEO of a company that employed thousands, that the Bennett on the store signs was his family name. Instead, he found himself saying, "It's complicated. My father's business. I took it over when he passed." Not a lie, but far from the complete truth. "And do you enjoy it? The supermarket business?" Matthew considered the question. When was the last time anyone had asked if he enjoyed his work? "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's not what I would have chosen for myself." "What would you have chosen?" Emma's question was gentle but direct. "Music," he answered without hesitation. "I was on track for Juilliard before my father convinced me the business needed me more than the world needed another pianist." Emma's expression softened with understanding. "It's never too late, you know, for music." Their eyes met, and Matthew felt an unfamiliar pull, a desire to be honest, to be known. The streetlight illuminated Emma's face, highlighting the spray of freckles across her nose. Before he could reconsider, he leaned forward and kissed her. To his surprise and relief, she kissed him back. When they separated, her smile was bemused. "I don't usually kiss supermarket employees I've known for less than a month," she said, lightly. "I don't usually kiss music teachers," he countered, ignoring the twist of guilt at the continued deception. As Matthew drove away, his phone buzzed with notifications, 27 emails and 5 missed calls from his executive team. Tomorrow he would return to his penthouse office, where the view stretched across the city to the very neighborhood where Emma taught her students. 2 worlds, separated by more than just distance. He made a decision then. After the fundraiser, he would tell Emma everything. He would face whatever consequence came with the truth, even if it meant losing the one genuine connection he'd formed in years. But for now, for just a little longer, he wanted to be simply Matthew, the man who played piano on Thursday afternoons and kissed music teachers under streetlights. The night of the fundraiser arrived with an unexpected spring shower. Emma paced the community center's makeshift stage area, checking microphones and adjusting chairs. Her navy blue dress, the one splurge she'd allowed herself this year, contrasted with her usual casual teaching attire. Everything will be perfect. Sarah, another teacher at the center, assured her while arranging programs. I just wish we had more guests coming, Emma sighed, glancing at the modest seating arrangement. Despite weeks of outreach, only 35 people had confirmed attendance, mostly parents and a few loyal supporters. The major donors she'd hoped to attract had sent polite declines. The center's financial situation was becoming dire. Last week, the building owner had mentioned raising the rent, a cost that would effectively shut down the program. Emma hadn't shared this news with the students or volunteers yet, including Matthew. Matthew. The thought of him brought both warmth and confusion. Their relationship had progressed quickly over the past weeks, evolving from friendship to something deeper. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back. Whenever the conversation turned to his work or background, he became evasive, redirecting with practiced skill. The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. Matthew entered, looking unexpectedly elegant in a tailored suit that seemed far too expensive for a supermarket employee. He carried a large bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flower, though she didn't recall mentioning that to him. "You look stunning," he said, crossing the room to kiss her cheek. "And impressive." He gestured to the transformed space. "You've worked magic here." "Hardly magic, just a lot of borrowed tablecloths and fairy lights." She accepted the flowers with a questioning look. "This suit doesn't look like standard supermarket manager attire." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "I clean up okay for special occasions." Before Emma could press further, the first families began arriving. Soon, the modest space filled, with excited children in their best clothes and proud parents clutching cameras. Emma was swept into her role as director, organizing performers and welcoming guests. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Matthew speaking with Mr. Jameson, their elderly piano donor. The conversation seemed unusually animated, with Mr. Jameson looking increasingly surprised. When Matthew casually pulled out his checkbook and wrote something that made the older man's eyes widen, Emma felt a prickle of unease. The performance began with the youngest students playing simple pieces with endearing concentration. As the evening progressed, the more advanced students showcased their talents. Zach, who had struggled for months with a Clementi sonatina, performed flawlessly, beaming when he received enthusiastic applause. Finally, it was time for the special guest performance. Emma introduced Matthew with genuine pride. "Many of you have met our dedicated volunteer Matthew, who has been helping our students for the past month. What you may not know is that he's a gifted pianist in his own right." Matthew approached the piano, looking momentarily nervous before settling onto the bench. When he began to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, the room fell silent. His technique was impeccable, his interpretation passionate and nuanced, clearly the product of years of dedicated training. Emma watched, mesmerized, but increasingly puzzled. This was not the playing of someone who had abandoned music years, ergo for a career in retail. This was the performance of a concert-level pianist who practiced daily. After thunderous applause, the formal portion of the evening concluded, transitioning to refreshments and mingling. Emma tried to make her way to Matthew, but found herself continuously intercepted by parents and students offering congratulations on the program. When she finally broke free, she overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. "Can't believe. Matthew Bennett himself has been volunteering here," an older woman was saying to her companion. "The CEO of Bennett Retail Group, playing piano for children. Charlotte at the Symphony Guild will never believe it." "I heard he donated $50,000 tonight, just like that," her friend replied, snapping her fingers. "Well, that's pocket change when you're worth billions." Emma stood frozen, the pieces suddenly clicking into place, the expensive clothes that he downplayed, the way he seemed to know the store layout perfectly, his evasiveness about his work, the mysterious phone calls he always stepped away to take. Matthew Bennett, not a store employee, but the owner of the entire chain. One of the wealthiest men in the state. She spotted him across the room, deep in conversation with a group of parents. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his smile fading when he saw her expression. He excused himself and made his way to her. "Emma!" "Is it true?" she interrupted, her voice low but intense. "Are you Matthew Bennett, as in Bennett Retail Group?" His silence was answer enough. "All this time," she continued, struggling to keep her voice steady, "you let me believe you were a store employee. You watched me stress about funding, about keeping this place open. Was this some kind of game to you, slumming with the commoners?" "Emma, no, it wasn't like that." Matthew reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "At first it was just a misunderstanding, but then I liked how you treated me, like a normal person, not a walking checkbook." "So you lied for weeks?" "I didn't lie about who I am," he insisted. "Everything I shared about my life, my love for music, my feelings for you, that was all real. Except the tiny detail that you own the company whose charitable foundation I've been desperately trying to contact." Emma's voice cracked. "Do you know what we could have done with even a fraction of that $50,000 you casually wrote a check for tonight? How many more children we could have helped?" "That's why I made the donation," Matthew explained. "I was planning to tell you everything tonight after the fundraiser. I never meant to hurt you." Emma shook her head, tears threatening. "You watched me scramble for every dollar, knowing you could solve our problems with the equivalent of pocket change to you." She stepped back. "I need you to leave." "Emma, please." "Now, Matthew, or should I call you Mr. Bennett?" The coldness in her voice struck him like a physical blow. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the community center, painfully aware of the curious glances following him. Outside in the parking lot, rain fell steadily, soaking through his expensive suit. His phone buzzed, his assistant no doubt with another urgent matter requiring his attention. The contrast between the warmth of the music center and the cold isolation of his real life had never felt more stark. Back inside, Emma maintained her composure as she thanked the remaining guests. Only after the last family departed did she allow herself to sink into a chair, emotionally exhausted. Sarah approached cautiously, placing a newspaper on the table beside her. "You might want to see this," she said gently. "It was in yesterday's business section." Emma glanced at the article. "Bennett Retail Group announces major arts initiative." The accompanying photo showed Matthew in a boardroom, announcing a new $10 million commitment to arts education in underserved communities. "The timing suggests he planned this before tonight," Sarah observed. "Maybe his intentions weren't as self-serving as they seem." Emma stared at the photograph. The man in the tailored business suit looked nothing like her Matthew, the one who sat patiently with struggling students and brought her coffee exactly how she liked it. Yet they were the same person. As she drove home through the rain, Emma passed a Bennett supermarket, its illuminated sign a reminder of the deception. She had fallen for a man who didn't exist, or rather, for only half of who he truly was. Yet, even in her anger, a small voice reminded her that the music they'd shared, the connection they'd formed, had felt undeniably genuine. The question remaining was whether that connection could survive in the harsh light of reality, or if it had been merely a beautiful illusion all along. 2 weeks had passed since the fundraiser, and Emma had successfully avoided all contact with Matthew. She deleted his messages unread and returned the elegant arrangement of flowers he'd sent to the community center. The substantial check he'd written, however, remained uncashed on her desk, a constant reminder of their broken trust. The children asked about him frequently. "When is Mr. Matt coming back?" Zach inquired during his lesson, his small fingers hovering uncertainly over the keys. Emma had no answer that wouldn't betray the complexity of adult disappointments. "He's very busy with work," she finally replied, the understatement of the year. If only Matthew's influence could be so easily dismissed from her thoughts. Every time she passed a Bennett store, every time his company's logo appeared on a delivery truck or billboard, she felt the familiar twist of hurt and confusion. The man she had been falling in love with and the billionaire CEO seemed like two entirely different people. On Wednesday morning, Emma arrived at the center to find an official-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a letter from Oak Ridge Development Corporation informing her that the building had been sold to new owners and all current lease arrangements would be honored for 6 months before reassessment. 6 months, Emma murmured, sinking into her chair. Finding an affordable new location in Oak Ridge would be nearly impossible with their limited budget, even with the recent donations. The thought of telling her students that their musical home might disappear was unbearable. When her phone rang, with an unknown number, she answered without thinking, her mind still processing the letter's implications. Emma Sullivan speaking. "Miss Sullivan, this is Victoria Shepherd from the Bennett Foundation." The woman's voice was crisp and professional. "I'm calling to discuss your recent grant application for the Oak Ridge Community Music Program." Emma's grip tightened on the phone. "I submitted that application over 6 months ago." "Yes, and we apologize for the delayed response. The Foundation would like to invite you to present your program to our board tomorrow afternoon." Emma almost laughed at the absurdity. After months of silence, now they wanted a meeting. The timing was too coincidental. "Did Matthew Bennett arrange this?" she asked directly. A brief pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the internal processes of our application review, Ms. Sullivan. The invitation stands regardless. This is a significant opportunity for your program." Emma knew she couldn't afford to refuse out of pride. For her students' sake, she agreed to the meeting. The next day, Emma stood before the entrance of the Bennett Tower, an imposing glass structure in downtown Oak Ridge. The contrast with her humble community center couldn't have been more striking. Inside, security directed her to the executive elevator. The Foundation's boardroom occupied the 32nd floor, offering panoramic views of the city. 9 people sat around a massive table, all in business attire that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Matthew was nowhere to be seen. Victoria Shepherd, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, introduced Emma to the board. Ms. Sullivan's program serves nearly 50 students from low-income backgrounds, providing music education that would otherwise be inaccessible to them. Emma delivered her carefully prepared presentation, showing videos of student performances and sharing success stories. Despite her lingering anger at Matthew, her passion for her work shone through as she spoke about her vision for expanding the program. "Any questions?" she concluded, bracing herself for critique. An older board member leaned forward. "Ms. Sullivan, your dedication is evident, but financially speaking, this program seems precarious. What's your sustainability plan?" Before Emma could answer, the boardroom door opened. Matthew entered, not in his usual elegant suit, but in more casual attire, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that more closely resembled the Matthew she had known. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. Board members straightened in their seats as Matthew took an empty chair, not at the head of the table but directly across from Emma. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. "I apologize for my tardiness," he said to the room before turning to Emma. "Please continue, Ms. Sullivan." Emma swallowed her surprise and addressed the question about sustainability. As she spoke, she could feel Matthew's gaze on her, but she kept her focus on the other board members. When she finished, Victoria consulted her notes. "Your current location, I understand there's some uncertainty there." "The building was recently sold," Emma confirmed, struggling to keep her tone neutral. "We have 6 months remaining on our lease." "Interesting timing," Victoria remarked. "The Foundation has recently acquired a historic property on Maple Street that might suit your needs. It would require renovation, of course, but the location is excellent." Emma's suspicions flared. How recently was this property acquired? Victoria glanced at Matthew, who answered quietly, "Last week." Another board member jumped in. "The property could be developed as a dedicated community arts center, with your music program as the cornerstone tenant." Rent would be symbolic, $1 per year. Emma took a steadying breath. The offer was exactly what her program needed: stability, room to grow, legitimacy, yet the orchestration behind it was painfully transparent. And what would the Bennett Foundation expect in return? She asked directly. Standard recognition as a primary sponsor, Victoria replied. Annual reports on program outcomes, nothing unusual. I'd like to speak with Ms. Sullivan privately, Matthew interjected suddenly, if the board will excuse us. After a moment of surprised silence, the board members filed out. When the door closed, Emma and Matthew faced each other alone for the first time since the fundraiser. This is inappropriate, Emma stated flatly. Using your foundation to... The foundation operates independently, Matthew interrupted. I didn't vote on your grant. The board recognized the merits of your program on its own. And the building purchase, the convenient timing, the special invitation after months of silence, Emma challenged. You can't buy forgiveness, Matthew. He winced at her words. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about supporting worthy programs, which yours undeniably is. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their time together. Yes, I expedited your application review. Yes, I suggested the property acquisition. But the foundation needed a flagship program for its arts initiative regardless. So I should be grateful. Emma's voice was quiet but intense. You lied to me for weeks, Matthew. You watched me struggle while sitting on resources that could have changed everything for my students. I know. He moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. I've handled this all wrong. But separating Matthew Bennett, the man, from Matthew Bennett, the CEO, isn't as simple as you might think. For most people, the money is all they see. That's no excuse for deception. No, it's not. He turned back to face her. But it is the reason. With you, for the first time in years, I was just me. Not my bank account or my company or my family name. Just the person who loves Debussy and terrible sci-fi movies and you. The raw honesty in his voice caught Emma off guard. For weeks, she'd clung to her anger, using it as a shield against more vulnerable feelings. Now that shield was cracking. The Foundation's offer stands regardless of our personal history, Matthew continued. These opportunities for your students are real and available, whether or not you ever speak to me again. Emma studied him, seeing both versions of Matthew simultaneously, the volunteer who had patiently helped Zach with his piano lessons, and the powerful businessman who could acquire buildings on a whim. I need time, she said finally, to think about all of this. Matthew nodded, not pushing further. Take whatever time you need. The offer has no expiration date. As Emma gathered her presentation materials, Matthew added softly, for what it's worth, those weeks volunteering at the center were the most meaningful I've had in years. That wasn't pretend. Outside the Bennett Tower, Emma sat in her car, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. The Foundation's offer would secure her program's future, providing opportunities she'd only dreamed of for her students. Rejecting it out of personal pride would be selfish. Yet accepting meant acknowledging that some good had come from Matthew's deception, that the end might, in some way, justify the means. As she drove back to the community center, the city, skyline dominated by the Bennett Tower, gradually gave way to the more modest buildings of her neighborhood. Two worlds, seemingly incompatible yet now irrevocably connected. The next day's newspaper featured a small article announcing the Bennett Foundation's plans for a new community arts center. The piece mentioned the Oak Ridge Community Music Program as a potential partner organization. Emma's phone hadn't stopped ringing since morning. Calls from excited parents, local officials suddenly interested in arts education, and other non-profits seeking collaboration. The momentum was building, with or without her explicit agreement. The question remaining was whether the music center's future could be disentangled from her complicated feelings for the man who had set everything in motion. 3 months later, the transformation of the historic Maple Street building was well underway. What had once been an abandoned library was now taking shape as the Oak Ridge Community Arts Center, with the music program as its centerpiece. Large windows had been installed to flood the practice rooms with natural light, and the main performance hall was being outfitted with professional acoustics. Emma walked through the construction site, marveling at how closely the renovation followed the vision she'd described in casual conversations months ago. The contractors consulted her on every decision, treating her opinions with a respect she'd rarely experienced in her professional life. "Ms. Sullivan," the project manager approached with blueprints, "we need your input on the student lounge area, and the piano delivery is scheduled for next Tuesday, 5 New Steinways." Emma nodded, still adjusting to this new reality where her casual wishes materialized into concrete plans. After careful consideration, she had accepted the Bennett Foundation's offer, recognizing that her students deserved these opportunities regardless of her complicated feelings about their source. She had not, however, accepted Matthew's attempts to reconnect personally. Their communication remained strictly professional, conducted primarily through Victoria and the foundation staff. If Matthew attended planning meetings, Emma ensured other board members were present. She maintained this careful distance even as her anger gradually softened into something more nuanced. That afternoon, Emma taught her regular classes at the old community center. Despite the excitement about the new building, she felt nostalgic about the humble space where so many musical journeys had begun, including, in a way, her own unexpected journey with Matthew. "Miss Emma, look," Zach called out during his lesson, proudly displaying a difficult passage he'd finally mastered. "Mr. Matt taught me this trick for the left-hand crossing. I've been practicing every day." Emma smiled, hiding her surprise. "Mr. Matt showed you that? When?" "At Saturday morning. Practice. He's been helping lots of us," Zach replied casually, returning to his piece. Emma frowned. She taught Monday through Friday. There was no Saturday morning practice in their official schedule. After classes ended, she approached Sarah. "What's this about Saturday practices with Matthew?" Sarah looked uncomfortable. "It started about 6 weeks ago, just a few students at first, the ones who couldn't afford extra practice time at home. Matthew offered to open the center and supervise. Now about 15 kids come regularly." She hesitated. "We didn't tell you because, well, you made it clear you wanted distance from him. I've been volunteering all this time, without recognition or publicity. He brings donuts," Sarah added with a small smile. "The kids adore him." That evening, Emma remained at the center after everyone left, playing softly on the old upright piano. The revelation about Matthew's continued involvement with the students, conducted quietly, without using it as leverage to regain her favor, had unsettled her carefully maintained defenses. A noise at the door interrupted her thoughts. Matthew stood in the entrance, clearly surprised to find her there. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I left some sheet music earlier. I didn't expect anyone to be here." In the awkward silence that followed, Emma noticed subtle changes in him. He looked more relaxed than he had in the boardroom, dressed simply in jeans and a faded Harvard sweatshirt. Yet there were new lines around his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. "Sarah told me about the Saturday sessions," Emma said finally. Matthew nodded, neither defensive nor boastful. The kids needed the practice time. It seemed like the right thing to do. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered?" He leaned against the doorframe. "I thought you'd prefer I keep my distance." "I did. I do." Emma closed the piano lid gently. "But I appreciate what you're doing for the students." Another silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Matthew took a folded newspaper from his back pocket and placed it on the nearest table. "You might want to see this. The Williamson Foundation is accepting nominations for their annual Excellence in Arts Education Award. The winner receives $100,000 in program funding." He moved toward the door. "Your program should apply. If you need a recommendation, I'd be honored to provide one, or I can ask someone else from the foundation if you prefer." As he turned to leave, Emma called after him, "Matthew." When he looked back, she asked the question that had lingered for months. "Why did you keep coming back here, even after I found out who you were? Even after I pushed you away, why?" He considered his answer carefully. "My whole life, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me, My name, my money, my connections. You wanted me to help Zach with his arpeggios. A sad smile crossed his face. Do you know how rare that is? The simple truth of his words resonated with her. I have a rehearsal tomorrow afternoon for the opening gala, she said, surprising herself with the implicit invitation. The acoustics in the new recital hall need testing. Matthew's expression lightened. What time? 4 o'clock. I'll be there. True to his word, Matthew arrived at the new arts center at precisely 4 the next day. He sat quietly in the back row as Emma rehearsed with a small ensemble of advanced students. When they finished, the teenagers packed up their instruments, leaving Emma and Matthew alone in the spacious hall. The acoustics are perfect, she admitted, joining him in the audience seating. Better than I imagined. The architect specialized in performance spaces, Matthew replied, though I suspect she made some adjustments based on your feedback. They sat in companionable silence, the tension between them not gone but somehow less fraught. I filed the paperwork to make the Bennett Foundation's relationship with the Arts Center completely independent from my personal oversight, Matthew said eventually. The funding is guaranteed regardless of anything else. Emma understood what he was offering: freedom from obligation, a clean separation between their personal relationship and the program's future. Thank you, she said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, would you like to play something to really test the acoustics? They moved to the Steinway grand piano at the center of the stage. Sitting side by side on the bench, they began a Schubert duet they'd once practiced together during happier times. As their hands moved across the keys, occasionally brushing against each other, Emma felt the familiar connection that had drawn her to Matthew from the beginning. Not the billionaire CEO, but the man who played Debussy with his eyes closed and spent Saturday mornings helping children master difficult passages. I missed this, Matthew said quietly when they finished, not moving away from her on the bench. I missed you. I missed you too, Emma admitted, but I'm still trying to reconcile the 2 versions of you I've met. There aren't 2 versions, Matthew replied. Just one person who was afraid of losing something genuine by revealing the whole truth. He turned to face her fully. I can't change my name or my circumstances, Emma, but I can promise transparency from now on. Transparency works both ways, she countered. I need you to understand that I can't be comfortable in your world of wealth and privilege. That's not who I am. I know, Matthew said. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking for the chance to find a balance, somewhere between your world and mine. The grand opening of the Oak Ridge Community Arts Center took place on a perfect autumn evening 6 weeks later. Community members, donors, and local officials gathered to celebrate as students from the music program performed in the new recital hall. Emma moved through the crowd in a simple emerald dress, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about enrollment for the expanded program. The evening represented everything she'd worked toward for years: a permanent home for music education, accessible to all children, regardless of their circumstances. Near the refreshment table, she spotted Matthew deep in conversation with Zach's mother, a factory worker who had struggled to provide her son with musical opportunities before finding the community program. There was no condescension in Matthew's posture, no performative charity, just genuine interest as the woman described her son's progress. When Matthew noticed Emma watching, he smiled but didn't immediately approach, respecting the boundaries. They were still carefully navigating. They had been taking small steps forward in recent weeks: coffee after Saturday practice sessions, occasional dinners to discuss program development, a gradual rebuilding of trust. As the formal portion of the evening concluded, Emma found herself alone on the empty stage, absorbing the quiet satisfaction of dreams realized. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she turned to find Matthew approaching with 2 champagne glasses. To new beginnings, he offered, handing her a glass. And honest ones, she added meaningfully. They stood together at the edge of the stage, looking out at the space they had created, not just a building, but a bridge between communities that rarely intersected in meaningful ways. The foundation received a proposal today, Matthew mentioned casually. From a music teacher in Riverdale who wants to replicate this program. Victoria thinks we could create a network of community arts centers throughout the state. That would be extraordinary, Emma agreed, imagining the possibilities. It would require someone to coordinate between locations, develop curriculum standards, train new teachers. He glanced at her. Someone who understands both the artistic and administrative challenges. Emma raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Bennett? I'm suggesting a partnership, he corrected gently. Professional and... He hesitated, before adding, whatever else we decide it might become. Emma considered his words. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, the complications of their different worlds not easily resolved. Yet the potential, both for the arts education they both valued and for their personal connection, seemed worth the complexity. I might be interested in discussing such a partnership, she replied with careful optimism. Later that evening, as most guests departed, Emma and Matthew found themselves back at the piano. Without discussion, they began playing together, not a rehearsed duet this time, but an improvisation, each responding to the other's musical ideas, creating something new between them. Like their relationship, the music wasn't perfect. There were occasional discordant notes, moments of uncertainty where they had to find their way back to harmony. But there was also beauty in the process, in the willingness to listen, adapt, and continue playing, even through difficult passages. From the doorway, Sarah watched them with a knowing smile before quietly closing the door, leaving them to compose whatever might come next. Outside, the illuminated sign for the Oak Ridge Community Arts Center cast a warm glow onto the street. Inside, two people from vastly different worlds continued their delicate improvisation, discovering that the most meaningful connections often arise from unexpected beginnings, like a chance encounter in a supermarket aisle, where a simple question about imported spices had set an extraordinary melody in motion.